Here comes the fish head singing. Here comes the baked potato in drag. Here comes a termite with a banjo. Here comes nothing to do all day long. Here comes a flagpole with blank eyes. Here comes another night of no sleep. Here comes the phone ringing the wrong tone. Here comes a cat and a dog wearing nylons. Here comes a machine gun saying. Here comes bacon burning in the pan. Here comes a voice saying something dull. Here comes a newspaper stuffed with small red birds with flat brown beaks. Here comes a cunt carrying a torch, a grenade, a deathly love. Here comes a victory carrying one bucket of blood and stumbling over the berry bush. And the sheets hang out the windows and the bombers head east, west, north, south. Get lost, get tossed like salad, as all the fish in the sea line up and form. One line, one long line, one very long thin line, the longest line you could ever imagine. And we get lost walking past purple mountains. We walk lost, bare at last like the knife, having given, having spirted up like an unexpected olive seed, as the girl at the call service screams over the phone.
Stop acting so small. You are the universe in ecstatic motion. The wound is the place where the light enters you. The minute I heard my first love story, not knowing how blind that was, I started looking for you. What you seek is seeking you. Lovers don't finally meet somewhere, they're in each other all along.
He was addicted. And the
trouble is what
advertising
brought
their
us to
aspirin
life.
and also their heroin caused a huge problem throughout China. Opium addicts stopped working, stopped caring for their families, family unity broke down. Money started draining out of China towards the opium smugglers. And by the way, there were many domestic opium growers in China too, so young ladies were doing it. The whole country was addicted. At this point, again, Qianlong stopped his reign in 1799, so this is another emperor. We're in the 1730s now, late 30s. I'm sorry, the 1830s. He wrote a letter to the new ruler of England, Queen Victoria. Ironically, Victorianism is known as the most puritanical and moral period of modern English history, and yet Victoria had no issues with the opium trade and export into China. So this was certainly not a problem caused by the British and other Western opium smugglers, but it was definitely exacerbated by it. Here you point, China's doors have the Chinese emperor commissioned a man named Lin, now in the process of being carved up by deal with the opium European traders and European missionaries. The import of it from Chinese history will never be the same since. And this is a letter that Commissioner Lin wrote to Queen Victoria. Although it's doubtful that she ever read it, he posted it openly to her in Canton and other cities. I quote, "After a long period of commercial intercourse, there appear among the crowd of barbarians," and he's talking about the merchants, "both good persons and bad, unevenly. Consequently, there are those who smuggle opium to seduce the Chinese people and so cause the spread of the poison to all provinces. Such persons who only care to profit themselves and disregard their harm to others are not tolerated by the laws of heaven and are unanimously hated by human beings. His Majesty the Emperor, upon hearing of this, is in a towering rage. He has especially sent me to settle this matter." Schlain goes on to say, even though the barbarians may not necessarily intend to do us harm, yet in coveting profit to an extreme, they have no regard for injuring others. He then goes on to make a very Confucian and ethical response, or question, or appeal to Queen Victoria by this little rhetorical trick. Let us ask, where is your conscience? I have heard that the smoking of opium is very strictly forbidden by your country. That's because the harm caused by opium is clearly understood. Since it is not permitted to do harm to your own country, then even less should you let it be passed on to the harm of other countries. Of all that China exports to foreign countries, there's not a single thing which is not beneficial when eaten, or of benefit when used, or of benefit when resold. All are beneficial. Is there a single article from China which has done any harm to foreign countries? Take tea and rhubarb, for example, and this is kind of fun laxative. The Europeans could not go to the bathroom. So Len says, take tea and rhubarb, for example. The foreign countries cannot get along for a single day without them. Moreover, the woolens of foreign countries cannot be woven unless they obtain Chinese silk. As for other foodstuffs, beginning with candy, ginger, cinnamon, and so forth, and articles for use, beginning with silk, satin, chinaware, and so on, all the things that must be had by foreign countries are innumerable. On the other hand, articles coming from the outside to China can only be used as toys. We can take them or get along without them. Since they are not needed by China, what difficulty would there be if we close the frontier and stop the trade? China is here threatening to just end all foreign trade. Nevertheless, our celestial court lets tea, silk, and other goods be shipped without limit and circulated everywhere, without begrudging it in the slightest. This is for no other reason, he concludes, but to share the benefit with the people of the whole world. Now, you can draw your own conclusions. There's a lot to be said and criticized about Len's letter. Surely China wasn't only doing this out of the goodness of their hearts, because there was a lot of silver to be gained by selling tea around the world. In any case, Western opium merchants resisted any calls to stop the trade, leading to a standoff in Canton where Commissioner Lin brought in Chinese troops. He then mixed it with confiscated tons and tons of opium. Dumped many tons worth of fortune, and this leads us into the Bay. 1839, British retaliation. The British sent warships up from Singapore and India into China. They entered not only Canton, but also Shanghai, went up the rivers, engaged in naval warfare, and completely blew the Chinese out of the water. Long story short, China was totally humiliated and had no choice but to sign a peace treaty in 1842. They signed it on a British merchant ship. It was one of the terms of the Treaty of Nanjing. China had to give the island of Hong Kong to England. Hong Kong, by the way, was not settled until this opium conflict, because it was during Commissioner Lin's pressures on Canton that the British took their opium and went to the empty island of Hong Kong at that time to form an alternative base where they had more freedom to smoke opium residents. The British also demanded that people could now live inside the ports. Those people who lived inside the ports, the British demanded, must be given extraterritoriality. That means that if they were not subject to Chinese law, they could break Chinese laws and not be tried in Chinese courts or punished by the Chinese government. If there was any sort of trial to be brought, it would be by foreign law courts under foreign law. And finally, less important, but still pretty predictable, they insisted on favorable import tariffs, a maximum of 5%, so that their goods would be cheaper to Chinese consumers. It has to be said that, again, domestic Chinese production was so
There's a blue bird in my heart that
abundant
wants
already
to get
that
out,
even with
but
these
I'm too
provisions,
tough for her. I
foreign
say,
imports into
stay in
China.
there, I'm not going to let anybody see. There's a blue bird in my heart that wants to get out, but I'm too clever. I only let her out at night sometimes, when everybody's asleep. I say, I know that you're there, so don't be sad. Then I put her back, but she's singing a little, in there, I haven't quite let her die, and we sleep together like that with our secret pact, and it's nice enough to make a girl weep, but I don't weep, do you? Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right-doing there is a field. I'll meet you there, when the soul lies down in that grass the world is too full to talk about. You want to screw up the works, you want to blow my book sales in Europe. There's a blue bird in my heart that wants to get up, but I'm too clever, I only let her out at night sometimes, when everybody's asleep. There's a blue bird in my heart that wants to get out, but I pour whiskey on her and inhale cigarette smoke, and the whores and the bartenders, and the grocery clerks, never know that she's in there. There's a blue bird in my heart that wants to get out, but I'm too tough for her. I say, stay down, do you want to mess me up?
Would be really dangerous. And beginning 400,000 years ago, we got our wish. For reasons unknown, our brain underwent this extraordinary hyperinflation, and we added an entire pound of brain tissue. We went from a 2-pound brain to a 3-pound brain in a very short period of time. Now, on your right, you see a gorilla pelvis. She weighs 200 pounds. She delivers a 3-pound infant. On your left, you see a human female who weighs 100 pounds, she delivers a 7-pound infant. This is a problem. The human female began to deliver the largest brain baby in all of animaldom. Any woman who's birthed a baby knows that the mismatch between the size of the baby's head and the diameter of the birth canal is such a mismatch that it produces a lot of problems delivering birth. There was recently an article in the New York Times that 20% of the women in sub-Saharan Africa are dying in childbirth. So evolution, to solve this problem, and first to try to solve it by getting around by coming up with these clever sleights of hand to thread the baby's head to the eye of the mother's birth canal. And then a catastrophe occurred. Women started to die in childbirth. I want you to think about this for a minute. There's no other animals where women die the females die in childbirth. I mean, humans have the highest female mortality rate delivering babies of any other species. I mean, fortunately, we live in a first world country where this is an extraordinarily rare event, but go out and look at any cemetery prior to the 20th century and look at the dates that women died, and a lot of them died in childbirth. It was a very common occurrence. So you would think, wouldn't you, that we should have gone extinct. I mean, how could we have a species where the healthy young mothers delivering their firstborns are dying along with their babies? So you would think that we would have evolved wider-hipped, ineffectually waddling women, or smaller brain babies, or go extinct. None of which occurred. So the solution to the problem, that natural selection reached into the baby's brain and ripped out most of the neuronal pathways that tell other animals how to behave at birth. They're called instincts. And the human animal is born with remarkably few instincts. But waiting for the baby on the other side of the mother's pelvic ring of bone are the missing pieces of the baby's brain. They're called culture. And they are held in a net of an astonishing new adaptation called human language. And human language is something so remarkable and so new that it required an entirely different neuronal setup. Now, all vertebrates, from fish forward, have a bilobe brain. They have a right lobe and a left lobe. And pretty much in all of these other species, one hemisphere does what the other hemisphere does. They're just mirror images of each other. Not so in humans. Even though our hemispheres look alike, they are functionally different. So that the right hemisphere in humans and the left hemisphere perform different functions. And this is remarkable because if you look at the brain, it doesn't look very different. Now, I don't mean to insult any lefties here, but just to keep this, so I don't have to keep qualifying everything I say, let's talk about right-handed people who are left brain dominant. This is the approximate area of the left hemisphere of a righty that is devoted to language. So language has several interesting characteristics. Number one, it's linear and it's sequential. It's one word at a time, one line at a time, one sentence at a time, one paragraph at a time. It's one thing after another. So evolution, in the economical manner that it works, said as long as we're dedicating this hemisphere and appropriating this neuronal real estate for language, let's put in all the other linear sequential things in that left hemisphere, such as arithmetic and algebra and sequence and logic and determinism. And I like to think of the left brain as a one-at-a-time brain, that it processes information in a one thing after another. It's about time. In contrast to the right hemisphere, which perceives the world all at once as a gestalt. The right hemisphere recognizes patterns. You get to see the parts of the whole. You know, and you stand outside and you look at a tableau, you see everything all at once, and then you start to see the relationship of the parts to the whole. You need your right hemisphere. Murder them they did, in very large numbers. The witch hunts did not occur in the Dark Ages. They didn't occur in the bubonic plagues. They occurred smack dab in the middle of the Gilded Renaissance. There has never been an adequate explanation as to why the men of Europe turned on their women. The witch hunts were the most severe in those countries that experienced the steepest rise in literacy. Germany, France, England, Switzerland, they had terrible witch hunts. Russia, which remained essentially illiterate, didn't have any witch hunts. Hungary and Bosnia, which were under Muslim rule, they didn't have any witch hunts. If you were to go to a Polynesian or a Kung or an Inuit and say, would you believe that there's a culture in the world where the men are murdering their wise women? They look at you in disbelief. They say, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. Everybody knows the men are supposed to go to the next village and kill the men there and steal the women, but you never kill your own women. This went on for 200 years. There's never been an adequate explanation for why sophisticated Europe, the only culture in the world that died with a knife and a fork, sunk to this incredible depravity. Now, this being a 45-minute lecture, we're going to skip to the 19th century because two things changed all that. One was the discovery of electromagnetism, and the other one was the invention of photography. Photography did for images what the printing press had done for the written word, made them cheap, easy, and available. By the end of the 19th century, there was virtually no one who had not sat for their photograph at least once. In the 200 years after the Protestant Reformation, if you said to somebody, your house is on fire and you could run in and retrieve one personal object, what would it be? The answer would be the family Bible. Within one generation of the invention of photography, the answer changed, and you all know what you would run in your home to retrieve if you could only get one thing. Now, electromagnetism and photography began to interweave, bringing forth new forms of communication. The first one was film. Film attendance surpassed church attendance within 6 years of its introduction, and it's never been close since. Now, everyone here in this room was educated in the Western manner. It's called reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's taught in a very linear, sequential fashion. It starts in kindergarten, goes right on up through college. We're all taught that way. And then in the 1950s, a new form of communication mixed with photography to bring forth television. Television was so radical, it required a different hemispheric strategy to see television. Now, electromagnetism and photography combined once again to bring forth another means of communication based on images called the personal computer and the internet. It is feminizing the world. The reason I say that is that for 5,000 years, the only way you could write was to write with one hand. At the end of the last century, the typewriter was invented, and you had to type with both hands. But the problem is that only women learned how to type. They were all the typists taking dictation from the bosses. The personal computer gets invented in the 70s, and all the men rush to learn a skill that their grandfathers considered was for sissies, called typing. So let's ask a question here. What is the effect on culture of having millions of men's left hands connected to millions of men's right brains, tapping out 1/2 of every written message? We've now witnessed an extraordinary change in the last 50 years since television, with an amazing rise in women's rights. I think that we are witnessing the end of a 5,000-year reign of patriarchy and misogyny brought on to a large extent by the introduction of alphabet literacy. And women, and women are now reclaiming the rights that they once had and took for granted a long time ago. Women are priestesses again in all the major religions except one, and that's going to change soon. Men are better fathers today to their children than they were 100 years ago, and they're better husbands to their wives than they were. So, of course, this is happening so rapidly that there's great dislocations in our culture, and the lower 20% of men who are insecure with their masculinity to begin with are very unhappy about this shift of power, because the women are gaining it and the men are losing it. And nobody ever gives up power willingly or easily. So you can expect a rise in rape statistics, domestic violence, sex and violence in movies and films. It's all part of a manifestation of what's really going on, which is a massive shift in a rise of the feminine and a fall of the masculine. Now, I believe that this is going to continue. So in summary here, let me just, supposing we plot the rise and fall of the goddess for 5,000 years, and we plot the rise and fall of sacred art for 5,000 years, and then we plot that against the rise and fall of alphabet literacy in 5,000 years, what we see is that these two graphs run contrapunctually. Now, I don't want to leave anyone to leave here saying that Schlain guy said nobody should read anymore. Reading is an invaluable skill that gives you access to information you would have a very hard time accessing in any other way. And at the same time, I also believe that Western culture in particular has been stuck for too long in a yang, beta, macho, left hemispheric mode. And we need to have more balance in our culture and within each individual. Now, I hope that this presentation has produced this response, showing how hominids evolved. 2.5 million years ago, one of our ancestors, known as Homo habilis, had a one-pint brain. And one of our ancestors looked in a riverbed and saw a rock, and picked up this rock and stared at it for a real long time with a one-pint brain, and imagined that there was a tool inside the rock. What a concept. And this person very patiently chipped at the edge of this rock until they got a sharp edge. They made exactly the same tool for 800,000 years. And along came Homo erectus, who had a two-pint brain. Homo erectus looked at the tool that Homo habilis had made and said, you know, if you turn the sucker over and hit it alternately on both sides, you get a really sharp edge. They made the same bifacial hand axe for 1 million years. They never varied it. And then along came Homo sapiens with a three-pint brain. And we made some slightly better tools in the beginning, and then, you know, we moved out of Africa 70,000 years ago. And then 40,000 years ago, something amazing happened called the Great Leap Forward in the Upper Paleolithic Revolution. We started to create representation art, consistently bury our dead, practice rituals, make beautiful grave books. And then 30,000 years ago, we invented the fish hook and the sewing needle. And then 50,000 years ago, we invented the bow and arrow. And then 8,000 years ago, we discovered agriculture. And 5,000 years ago, we invented writing. And 200 years ago, we had the Industrial Revolution. And 50 years ago, we had the technological revolution. So if you made a graph of human innovation, hominid innovation, it would be a flat line going 2.5 million years that would suddenly turn into grid. Now we know that in science, this cannot go on indefinitely. One of two things have to happen. Either the graph collapses, which we all know we're in danger of, or the object being studied changes state like that. If there was a caterpillar crawling across this podium, and I said to you, would you believe that this caterpillar is going to turn into a butterfly? And you didn't know that that could happen. You say that's impossible. But it happens all the time in nature. It's called metamorphosis. In physics, it's called a phase change. In biology, it's called metamorphosis. And in evolution, it's called punctuated equilibrium. Species change upside down. You can take water and you can heat water. And you can heat water, it's still water. You raise it 1 more degree. So why would we think that we're finished as a species? We are only 150,000 years old. All species on the planet live in general about 1 million to 1.2 million before they either go extinct or become something else. So at 150,000 years, we're like about 10 years old or 12. If you read the newspapers, we're behaving like that. You know, we're strong enough that we're starting to be dangerous to each other, but we're also starting to develop a moral, a sense of right and wrong. So I think that the limit of human intelligence was set by the diameter of the female's pelvis. You simply could not jam a bigger brain baby to it. So what we did to solve the problem is we started adding peripherals to our brain outside of our brain. The first peripheral was language. The next one was libraries and writing. Then we started adding cell phones and telescopes and radios and television. Every one of these things allows us to communicate with each other to a larger audience over greater distances in less time. So the reason that my computer is colored gray is that it happens to be a piece of my brain sitting on the desk. It's not wet. So what we've been doing is we've been adding silicone-based products to our skull that are outside of our skull, so we don't have to have this big brain, but we're increasing our computing capacity, our memory capacity, all of our communications abilities are increasing exponentially. And I believe that we are changing as we speak into a different kind of animal. Now, we're not going to grow, you're not going to have physical changes, but we're changing in terms of a transformation that has never been seen in evolution before. And, you know, it's very difficult to notice that the clothes are getting cleaner when you're in the inside of a spinning washing machine. And that's where we are right now. Question over here.
While I was reading this book, I continually wished for at least one diagram that would help me see what you were saying all at once. And on the pictures, you just briefly showed exactly that. And what I was wondering is, did the publisher object to including such a thing in the book?
Well, this presentation is the right brain version of the left brain book. Okay? The publisher, I'll tell you a cute story. I originally wanted 85 images in the book, because the book is about images, right? So they said, okay, we'll give you 85 images. And the writer is responsible for getting the permissions to do the images. So I remember I wanted this image from Crete, and they only turned their fax machine on at 1 hour in the morning. I had to go 3 hours to fax this woman to get these permissions. And I got all these 85 images, and the book came out, it was 560 pages long. The publisher said to me, no one wants to read a book over 500 pages. You must cut 80 pages from this book, and you must do it in a week, or you're going to miss your publication date. I said, 80 pages? If I cut 80 pages out of the book, I'll have to rewrite the book. They said, sorry, that you have to do. So if I cut an image out of the book, I got a half a page. So here I was, hoisted on my own petard, okay? I'd written a book about image. The subtitle of the book is The Word versus Image. And I had to decide what paragraphs I could eliminate, what stories I could eliminate, and which images I could eliminate. The book ends up with 33 images. And I came in at 486 pages. I got under that, and I made the publication. But in this kind of a presentation, I can show all of these images that I really would like to show.
Hey, you mentioned that the Renaissance and classical Greece and Athens, they were times of high literacy, but also, weren't they also great booms of art, visual arts, like Leonardo da Vinci and all these other great artists in visual?
Yes, there's no contradiction there. The fact that, you know, that whenever a new form of communication enters a culture, the culture explodes. It's happened, if you look throughout history, when writing first began, Mesopotamia, Egypt just burgeoned. When the Gutenberg printing press, everywhere Gutenberg's printing press has gone, the culture has gone through a tremendous revival of the arts and a tremendous increase in strife. So again, it's that Sophoclean aphorism, nothing vast enters the life of mortals without a curse. So the fact that artists were emboldened to create this fabulous art isn't a contradiction.
The Middle Ages were a horrible time there were war after war. People were fighting each other nonstop. 100 Years' War. It's you know, it's almost not been surpassed in history.
Interestingly enough, they didn't burn women then. Wouldn't you think that after 3 bubonic